and good morning to those of you, or good day, good evening, whenever you will be watching this video. I hope the day finds you good and well. I'm so glad that you decided to take the time to engage this conversation. I am Rhonda Hill. I am the Director of Race and Faith. And I'm so excited because this year will be our 10th year of being anti-racist, justice, advocates and warriors. And so I'm so glad that you've been a part of this 10-year journey in some way or fashion, whether it's been through these types of videos, book clubs, or if you come to a class or event, or even a Black Joy retreat. Thank you for helping us get to our 10 years. And so as a part of our same spirit of always trying to promote a more just, more anti-racist world, we have started a program called Roots and Resilience, where we are in its first iteration, really looking at Native American, Black American, and Jewish Americans, all separate histories, but looking at the threads that weave us all together, what has helped all of our cultures to be resilient. And so as a part of that program, we offer a book that we will read from one of those cultures. We will also have a lecture, and we will also then visit one of those cultural museums. And so I'm so glad that this first part is happening. We decided to start with Native American history and culture, which I think that's just befitting since we are here in what we now call the United States. And so to help me with this idea was my good friend, Elise, who has her own program where she works with Jewish children and Native children and really helping them on a larger scale have these cultural conversations, as well as creating real deep lasting friendships. And so her business is called Repairing Together. She introduced me to the wonderful person you see here now, Mark. And so I will allow Mark to introduce himself and talk more about why he agreed to work with us. And I really want to stress and say this before I turn it over to him, is to say that I think it, and I think I can speak for at least two in this, when I say, Elsie, when I say that we wanted to do this because we feel like our country in this time, we need it right now. With all of the works in the political world, in the divisive rhetoric, we thought it was really important to show how we really are more common, and how we really, in each of our perspective cultures, have important stories that have helped shape this country, that continues to inspire and help this country to be what it is. And we can always do more. And I just hope our stories of resilience inspire that in people, and work to bridge that divide. I think that's the spirit that we bring to this and what we hope people get out of it. So without further ado, the floor is yours.
Wayne
Or the
Bourgeois
screen is yours.
Wayne Bourgeois and the way Maganaduk, not away Benizi, and Dishnakas, Neme and Dodem, on a Schnabi and Dow, the open and Donjaba. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. It's really nice to be here. It's great to see all of the colors. We're coming to you from Wisconsin. I'm located in the Milwaukee area, and we're here to talk about a book called There There by Tommy Orange. And I'm looking forward to it because as a Native person, whenever someone contributes to the arts, which is works of fiction like this, a lot of this stuff sometimes is based in real life, and there are commonalities in our very diverse communities. So I'm here to kind of represent an Indigenous viewpoint, but what is so great about this kind of writing is that once the author releases it and out into the world, we bring our own interpretations and insights to it. And it gets to be really interesting and sometimes even brilliant when we begin to make connections and see things that matter. And we also may see things that matter, but we missed it. But because we have somebody from that culture, or maybe somebody from outside that culture, bringing in ideas that one may never think of or have seen before, things can get really interesting, and they can make the quality of our life better. I think there's so many other reasons that I think this book is great to be out there. So I'm just going to introduce it in a small way. I got a chance to see Tommy Orange present here in Milwaukee when the book first was published, in I think it was about 2018. A young writer, and this book is something he'd been working on for years. And certainly as a younger writer, I think he's 42 years old now, and is beginning that sort of, hey, I'm announcing I'm here, I have something of merit to offer. It certainly is a reflection on bringing awareness to Native American communities in very different ways, original ways, and in a lyrical way. And I look forward to this kind of book group and discussion, because there are some things that are meant to be read. There are some things meant to be read out loud, some things meant to be both. And I think this book for me is meant to be both read in the quietness and for our own. And also there are pieces of it that are poetry. And we need to share some of those passages with each other, the things that touch us, because they can really come over into that world of the spoken word. So just before I release this back to some questions and discussion, a little bit about me. Mark Denny, my English name, again, we're from right here in Wisconsin. I was born in Neopa, Wisconsin on Menominee Reservation. I am an adjunct lecturer at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And one of the things I teach about is Native American studies. And this is something that I've taught at the college, high school, and I believe it's at the junior high school level, which is interesting to me. I haven't had any requests at that level for a number of years now. But when it first came out, there were teachers at that level bringing this forward, because it was a way for them to bring in something that children were seeing on their TV screens. And unfortunately, that was gun violence.
Mm.
So just kind of, I want to park that there, because right now I think we're just a few chapters into the book, and I want to turn this over more to a more guided discussion rather than that mile high view, because that guided discussion is what's important and why we're here today. So I'll turn this right back over, and thanks for allowing me to be here, and to each of you, thanks for allowing me to be in your space.
Absolutely. But before we get into the book, I want to just be a little, you may not say it's vain, but I'm I'm saying it. When we first joined, we were sharing our beads. So
Oh,
I just
yes,
want to give a plug here for supporting Native art.
I do.
Um,
Yes,
yes,
this
let's do it.
necklace portion was done by my friend, another portion done by my daughter, and I am wearing this not just because the theme of the day is Tommy Orange, but also because we are coming up on a very important day for Canadian recognition and United States recognition. And that is on September 30th. We have in the US and Canada what's called Orange Shirt Day, or Every Child Matters Day, which is a fantastic recognition. And we encourage our children, our community members, and allies to wear orange. And the purpose of wearing orange is to bring attention and awareness to the subject of boarding schools. There was a time in the United States and Canadian history, and in Canada they called it the scoop. In the United States it was known by other names, where the federal government would come and take children from families and then put them into boarding schools that were run by the War Department, or they were run by religious orders contracted by the government. And these children, being separated from their parents, were told to not speak their language, to practice their traditional faiths, to embrace other faiths, to learn another language as their first language. There was a lot of abuse at these schools. There, both physical, sexual. There were a lot of our children buried at these schools, and right now, many of our tribes are in effort of bringing these children home. So this day of Every Child Matters means we're bringing forward those survivor stories, because those stories of having those children put into those kinds of environments that were not healthy in large part created circumstances of things like historic trauma or just troubling methods of raising kids, because essentially what we had were children raising children, or people who were not parents or religious faiths that believed that who was coming in, these were not human beings that were coming into them, and needed to be changed in what they did and how they functioned in the world. And a lot of this violence, a lot of the things that they were taught in the schools, then of course are learned and brought back home to areas where now we are experiencing, unfortunately, negative social impacts on what happened to the children of that era.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why the orange, that's why the wearing the orange for me, of course, it's nicely fits with the theme of why we're here, the color of the book. But I think there is a connection there to this movement of, there's my hat, it says Every Child Matters. We really get into this subject as Native folks, and we have that day of recognition and days of education so our children can know the names of their relatives who were forcefully put into these boarding schools. So anyway, that's why the orange, and
Yeah.
that's why the beadwork that I'm wearing, that I have on today, is just as we're moving into the 30th, please remember, and if you care to, wear orange, learn more, and
Yeah.
support the purpose of education.
Yeah, and I'll share more information about that with the release of this video for sure. Thank you for sharing that. But that's a perfect segue into the book There. And one of the first questions that I think is appropriate for me to ask you to talk about rolls right into what you already shared, and that's the historical trauma. And as we look, it's a lot of characters in this book, and we're in the first 4 chapters, and we've met 5 different characters already, stories from that first 5 different people we met, and all of them have a backstory presented. Much of it has trauma associated with it. And so I want to ask you just to discuss the impact even further. And I think you've already shared some of that with talking about every child and what we're to celebrate on or remember on the 30th. But you can go even more into that and how we see that in the novel. How those stories, those personal stories of some of the folks in those novels help lift up some of the historical injustices that's been faced by Native communities.
I think one of the things that makes this book so brilliant right from the get, so to speak, is the prologue. It's not
Mhm.
approached as a novel at all. It's approached as, this is my history, and I want to share this history for you so I can create a framework of understanding. And I think the author rightly assumes that when people come to the book, they don't know a lot of American Indian history, Native history, Indigenous history, and it's understandable. I don't agree with it, but it's understandable, meaning that Native people for a lot of our communities are 1.5 to 2.5% of populations, especially in urban areas, which is the setting of this book. So when people who are non-native situate natives in thought or in mind, sometimes it's stereotypes that lead it, with beads and feathers and furs. And that's a brilliant part of this book when it first opens, is where would most Americans see this who are older? And certainly that is a recognition of the power of media on our lives, both children and those who get older. So he's reflecting on an earlier life when TV had such a great influence, and we just had a few networks So the exposure to images and pictures and stories driven on a screen, uh, just where there was a lot of funneling of ideas, a lot of funneling of presumption. And he said the one thing in common, and is showing and demonstrating that America had, was on those TV screens when media would sign off for the night, sometimes at 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning, there would be a visual with a tone, and that visual was of a native person with a headdress. So right away, he's centering the stereotype of beads and feathers and furs as something as, okay, this is where most people understand and situate us. But the next thing he draws attention to is in that image, he creates the visual that it is a rifle scope through which that native person is being seen. So one would have to go back to those original images and what that would look like. And that was certainly true. So what he's saying through the lens of history, the lens of United States citizen, your average person, is through the lens of violence, through the lens of a gun. And so then he talks about the history as he wants to share it and does share it throughout it. And it's very emotional. And I've had students read some of these sections that they choose. And for people who are non-native, it's quite an emotional journey because he relates the story, because he understands the audience he's speaking to. So the audience he's speaking to is an audience that doesn't see us in urban environments. He's speaking sometimes in ways even to us as native people and insider community. And he wants us to see us as full and valued parts of community, no matter where we're from, be they urban or rural. And that all comes out clearly in the prologue. That prologue sets us up for developing a multiplicity of characters. And those characters, for in large part, I think for most of us as family members, non-native and native, can recognize individuals that are drawn as, you know what, that could be my sister, my brother, my cousin. I have a mom who has a friend like this. But each of the characters are drawn so distinctly, so individually, and so well that it forces the reader out of seeing us as this collective monolith of people of beads and feathers and furs and stereotypical behavior, assigned roles for gender, that kind of thing. The men have to be strong and be warriors. The women, a lot of times, are victims or just kind of waiting for the men to be done with whatever they do, and they're non-productive, right? There's a lot of this out there in literature, and we get it through older literature, we get it through older sorts of film. But he's taking all of that apart, and he's inviting us and asking us to look at characters who have their own thoughts, their own challenges, their own ideas of living through life. But that life, certainly, what is the thread that's holding it in common is the thread of a marginalized community, meaning because we're 1.5%, 2% of the population, because most of us, in fact, over 72% of us as Native people live in urban environments. A majority of Native Americans today live in city, live off reservation. A majority of them living in urban areas like Oakland, the community that he's writing about. So I think that was jarring sometimes to people, or they're being jarred and they don't know it
Yeah. No,
because they're
you're
distracted by all
totally
the other emotionality of everything else, right?
you're totally moving into my second question already. Again, with just this one is more of a focus on like the identity and heritage, and really how he speaks to the identity and heritage, but in an urban context.
I
Um,
think, yeah,
so
that's absolutely
how
right.
does the urban environment influence the people in the stories? How does it influence their connection to their heritage?
So I love that question because how did that urban environment inform, kind of affect? heritage and so on. That goes to your first question, which was really Billy, was scaffolding a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to address that first question directly, because I kind of went off a little bit.
Yeah, you
Historic,
got me into that urban space a
yeah.
little early. I
So
was smoothing it with there. I wasn't going,
yeah. So that piece of historic trauma certainly was developed out by some of our social scientists, and they had originally looked at Jewish population and the effects of what had happened when there were these internment camps, and these camps where folks were being killed, and what happened with the survivors, right? That creates trauma in a person. It creates, my gosh, the world I was born into is not the world I'm experiencing right now, where life is seen as expendable and random, and there's violence, and there's an idea of what does my life mean? The four questions that we often struggle through life, those are interrupted. That who am I? Where do I come from? Where am I going? What is my purpose? All of those things that culture helps inform us. What happens with traumatic events? Sometimes when those happen to us, they can stunt our growth as a person because we're so busy dealing with survival. Those questions of developing our sense of self, a positive sense of self, are interrupted, but not only interrupted, but being told that who you are isn't good enough. That what you are or what you were, what your ancestor, what your mom and dad were, are not good enough. That's why the title of the book, right? They're there isn't a direct bow and nod and assent of understanding that historic trauma happened to us. Earlier in the book, he goes into the piece where what does there mean? Where does it come from? How does he reference that term? And I would ask readers to look at those passages to understand what there means to the author and how that's interpreted for you. Now, taking a Native person whose identity, whose own individual sense of self has been ruined, wrecked, turned and twisted so much that many of our Native folks at one time would rather identify as anything else but being Native.
Yeah.
Are you Native? No, I'm Italian. Are you Native? No, I'm Irish, because Irish people have different hues, right? So I'm anything but Native to fit in, to get a job, to get all the denial of who they were was being reinforced by institutionalism. So now we have people coming from the boarding schools whose identity, where it was the word of the day when boarding schools were being formed, they were run by the War Department. And there was a term called kill the Indian, save the man.
Right.
That was a literal thing. Now imagine people who were children of this era now becoming parents, not having been parented themselves, and now bringing children into the world with other Native or non-Native people. What does that raising a child environment look like? The dysfunction of it, the idea of you don't talk about your background, don't be this or don't do that. And into that comes another generation that wants to take hold and say, no, we are Native. This does matter. But there's a generation there where the link between what we were and who we are has been broken, not in totality. Places of identity and our face still exist and existed then, but to understand the large swath of Native folks affected by boarding schools, and then in turn, those families being affected by dysfunction, domestic violence, sexual abuse, children being raised without parents, essentially, because we had parents not knowing how to be parents. This isn't to be excusing bad behaviors, but it's to recognize where these things come from and how they inform what's going on. Only by being aware of them, as there demands us to be, is to be aware of this trauma. and its effect? Can we do something about it? Because if we don't know about it, if we don't see it, we continue those behaviors now and into the future. So that goes to your question, when Native people were removed or moved into, because remember, there was a time when we were moved from our lands, forcefully moved onto reservations. And then there was a time when the United States government decided you need to leave these reservations and we want you to move and integrate into cities. And a lot of our older population were part of an American Indian program that was moving people into areas like Los Angeles, Milwaukee, Chicago, Minneapolis, Oakland. All these different cities became hubs for Native people coming to settle. And the government was paying people to leave the reservation. And then leaving the reservation, oftentimes they would leave together and then they would form their own neighborhoods. While this is happening, leaving the only home that they had known, forming a new home in lands that are unrecognizable and changed forever, they are now to make a living. They are now to be contributing members of society. And so all of this stuff, but understand there is baggage that comes with it. And we're seeing the results of what's happening because Tommy Orange centers what we know as the American Indian movement. So when it comes to trauma, how do we respond? We'll self-educate. We turn the clock back. What was it? When were we happy? When did we do well? And what happened in part of the book is not only lifting up of the American Indian movement, where people were coming together and reclaiming what it was to be Native, having powwows not just in reservations, but in urban environments. That American Indian movement brought a sense of pride and belonging to Native people. The takeover in the beginning of the book is Alcatraz Island. That was a response to a colonial presence, meaning land was taken. So now we're going to take back land too. We're going to land back this place, right? The name that young people use today. That was the American Indian movement. But within that movement was dysfunction. And he gave us a front row seat to see it.
Yeah. Thank you for those answering those questions. And as we wrap up, I like to, when I facilitate conversations, particularly on race, and in our book club, I like to have people go through our framework at Race and Faith, which is we really focus on the whole person, heart, mind, soul, strength, that we come to this time together. We approach this subject around issues of racism as a whole person. And so we're reading a book, and reading a book can be definitely an intellectual exercise, that it is, but we're not just only using our minds, right? Our heart is engaged in it, or at least we want our hearts to be engaged in it. Our belief system, our moral ethics, that's engaged in it, as well as our bodies. And so as we wrap up with our time together, I'm going to ask you, Mark, and those who've been watching, just to let's just take in a deep cleansing breath in through our nose at this moment in time. Allow ourselves to release. And again, just being aware and taking note of where are you feeling this in your body and what's going through you now at this moment in time. Another breath in through the nose. And out. And in this moment, what's most alive for you? Are you in a heart space right now? Are you feeling more deeply? What are the emotions? Are you in contact with that space? Are you in your mind? Have you been intellectually stimulated? Do you have more questions? What else do you need to learn? how is this playing around with your belief system? Are you triggered in that moral space? Are you trying to think about, decide right and wrong? Is there some spiritual hymn or text that's coming to you right now in this moment? Where is this showing up in your body? And then lastly, what is all of this making you want to do? Are you motivated to, now you've heard all this, like, I gotta go do something? um which, we all have our preference, but I try to ask people, like, take note of what's most alive for you now, but then challenge yourself to go to all those areas. Check in with your heart, check in with your mind, check in with your that soul space for you, that moral space for you. Check in with your body, and then move on to what you think you may be wanting to do or being called to do now in this moment. So we won't have time to just go through all of those things. So we'll just center in on, at this moment, what's most alive for you right now, having had this time. And I'll let you reflect more, sit with it a little bit more, and I'll share first. And for me, I think what's most uh alive for me right now is my heart. And it's more of one part compassion, other part of, I feel seen. And I do feel emotional about it too, because as a Black woman, we have similar stories. So those 4 questions that you mentioned that we're trying to answer, Black people too, because of the trauma, we're still trying to answer those 4 questions about ourselves. And so hearing you say that, I feel the compassion, I feel the camaraderie, but I feel seen. And so that's what's most alive for me right now in this moment. So thank you. So for you.
All right, everyone. I wish you good luck with this reading. And it is quite a book, and it does have its own emotionality to come with it. And please kind of turn back to that looking inward and finding peace within yourself, because the book can be upsetting,
Oh, but
especially
I
for
want you to
those.
share personally first. Don't close
Oh,
this yet. What's most alive for you right now before you close it?
oh, yeah. Okay.
Are you in the heart
So let me
space? You in
get
the
back to
mind
that. I
space?
was
You in the
still in
soul
teacher
space?
mode. I am
Oh,
taking that
okay.
off. And what I feel right now is a lot of gratitude when people take that journey to learn something that isn't about them, to take that mantle. I just feel a great deal of gratitude, because the natural question out there for a larger population is they deal with larger issues. But for us, our issues are large too. We and those issues can be positive and loving and amazing. They're not always hardcore, unjust stuff. And I think a book like There, what I'm feeling is like, I'm glad this book exists, and I'm glad you're reading it.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's just leave it right there. So
All
we
right.
end off on this space of gratitude. Gratitude for our time together, gratitude um for what we hope to accomplish through this Roots and Resilience program as we continue to explore Native Americans' contributions and resilience, and move towards looking at next the Black American experience, and then wrapping up with the Jewish American experience. I hope everyone feels inspired, feels connected, and feels seen and heard. So thank you all. Thank you, Mark. Bye-bye.
Everybody.